He trembled while mending his armor. "This is the first time a human has touched me," he said. Commander Zerk of the Zathari was unlike any other soldier. His race was known throughout the galaxy for their strength and invincibility, their battleships larger than most planets, their warriors feared across the stars. But today, Zerk found himself in a situation unlike any he had ever faced. The crash of his ship into the harsh and unforgiving surface of Vera 7 had changed everything. Stranded on this desolate, hostile planet with no way to communicate with his people, Zerk's survival seemed impossible. His ship, the Vengeance, had been a symbol of Zathari power, sleek, advanced, and nearly indestructible. Yet, like everything in the universe, it had its limits. Now, the wreckage of the once mighty vessel lay scattered across a wide, barren plain. A few hours ago, Zerk had watched helplessly as the mighty craft spiraled out of the sky, unable to steer it to safety. It was too late to fix it now. His armor was badly damaged, its systems flickering. The suit, a piece of Zathari technology that connected to his nervous system, was what made him truly powerful. Without it, he was just another being, weak and vulnerable. It was a fear he'd never known. With a deep breath, he checked the system once again, trying to make repairs. But the damage was far too severe. Even if he could repair it, he was surrounded by a hostile environment and creatures that would surely tear him apart. As Zerk's mind raced, searching for a solution, his vision blurred slightly. His blood, was pooling around his body from wounds that, under normal circumstances, would have been fatal. The weight of his armor only made things worse. With every passing second, his body felt heavier, more exhausted. Suddenly, Zerk's acute hearing picked up a sound: footsteps. They were light, almost unnoticeable, but the Zathari warrior's senses never lied. The sound came closer. A human? It didn't make sense. Humans were barely capable of surviving on their own planets, let alone here on this forsaken world. Zerk tried to push himself up, but his strength failed him. He fell back against the wreckage, groaning in pain. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, and then, through the haze of his fading consciousness, Zerk saw him. The human was tall, though smaller than Zerk by far. His clothes were simple, nothing compared to the advanced gear Zerk was used to seeing in the galaxy. But there was a confidence in the way he moved. The human's face was serious, but not fearful. It was the look of someone who had seen too many dangers and had learned to survive them. He carried only a small pack and a weapon that seemed far too simple for a world like this. Zerk knew that a human, armed with such a thing, wouldn't last long in a place like Vera 7. Yet here this one was, walking toward him without hesitation. Zerk felt the strange need to lash out, to challenge this human for daring to approach him. But his body refused to move. The human bent down beside him, observing him carefully. "Not much time," the human muttered under his breath, speaking in the language of the Galactic Federation. His voice was calm, unshaken. "I'm not gonna let you die here." Zerk's dark eyes narrowed, struggling to focus. His pride, his honor, all of it burned like a fire in his chest, but his body betrayed him. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. How dare a mere human come to his aid? But the human wasn't backing away. Instead, he was already assessing the damage to Zerk's armor, his hands moving with surprising efficiency. Zerk wanted to stop him, to tell him to get away, to demand that he be left to die on his own terms. But something inside him, something that went beyond logic, kept him still. His survival instincts screamed for him to fight, to push this human away, but he couldn't. Not anymore. "You're lucky," the human continued, not pausing in his work. "Most people would have walked right past you, but I don't leave anyone behind." Zerk's breathing was shallow, but his mind was racing. Why was this human helping him? Why didn't he fear him? His kind was known for their violence, their merciless nature. What would a human even want with a creature like him? But as Zerk watched, he realized something. This human, Lieutenant Ethan Harper, wasn't scared. In fact, there was a calm in the man's movements that made Zerk pause. Ethan worked carefully, pulling out tools from his pack, mending the armor where it had cracked, sealing the wounds that the battle had left behind. And all the while, he spoke softly, as if he were talking to a friend, not a monster of the stars. "I know you're not going to like this," Ethan said, glancing up at Zerk's face for a brief moment. "But I've got to take your helmet off. Can't fix this if I can't get to the damage underneath." Zerk froze. No one had ever dared to touch him like this, not without permission, not without a battle. But this human didn't even hesitate. His hands worked with surprising care, unfastening the pieces of the helmet until Zerk's face was exposed to the air. For a moment, Ethan stood still, as if noticing Zerk's intense gaze for the first time. His fingers trembled slightly, but he didn't look away. "Sorry," he muttered. "I know this isn't exactly comfortable for you." Zerk's gaze never left the human's face. There was no fear in those eyes, no hesitation, just a quiet determination. Zerk had been through hundreds of battles, fought in wars that had torn galaxies apart. He had faced enemies who trembled before his strength, who cowered in his presence. Yet this human, this one fragile, unarmored man, held his gaze without fear, without even a hint of doubt. It was baffling. Ethan continued his work, oblivious to the warrior's thoughts. Zerk felt a strange knot in his stomach. He didn't understand it. He was an alien warlord, a conqueror who had crushed civilizations without a second thought. Yet here, in the presence of this human, Zerk felt something he had never experienced before, something foreign, something unsettling. "Almost done," Ethan said, looking up once more, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "We'll get you back to full strength soon, just hang in there." Zerk's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time he spoke, his voice rough and strained. You help me." "A creature like me?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "You're not just a creature, Zerk, you're a person, and right now you need help, simple as that." Zerk's breath caught in his throat. A person. The idea was almost laughable. He had never been treated like a person. He had always been a weapon, a tool of destruction. To be seen as anything else was a foreign concept. For the first time in years, Zerk allowed himself to close his eyes just for a moment. Maybe this human wasn't so different after all. As the sun set behind the jagged horizon of Vera 7, casting long shadows over the barren landscape, Zerk lay on the rocky ground, his armor now repaired. His body still ached, but the pain was no longer overwhelming. The Zathari commander's strength was slowly returning, though his mind felt far more distant than usual. The human, Ethan Harper, had done what seemed impossible. He had saved Zerk. But it wasn't just the physical repair of the armor that troubled Zerk. It was the way Ethan had acted. Calm, focused, and without hesitation. Even after touching Zerk's vulnerable, unprotected skin, Ethan had not flinched. The Zathari's mind was a storm of confusion. His people were warriors, trained from birth to fight, to conquer, to rule. They had never relied on anyone else, never needed anyone else. And yet here he was, depending on a human, someone he had never cared for, someone whose kind had always been dismissed as weak. Now Ethan Harper had proven that he wasn't weak. He was strong in ways Zerk hadn't expected, and that made the commander uneasy. Ethan was sitting a few meters away, cleaning his gear. He moved with the same quiet efficiency as before, as if the dangerous planet they were stuck on was no more than a minor inconvenience. He had saved Zerk's life, twice now. First by pulling him from the wreckage, and then by repairing his armor with nothing more than a small pack of tools and sheer determination. And in between, he had never stopped talking, reassuring Zerk, explaining things, sharing stories of Earth and its people. Zerk had listened, though he didn't fully understand why. Why had the human continued to talk to him? Why hadn't he left him to die in the wreckage? "You know," Ethan's voice cut through the silence, "I've read a lot about your people, but it's not like I thought it would be." Zerk, still lying on his back, glanced at him. "What do you mean?" Ethan paused, setting down the piece of equipment he was holding, and looked directly at Zerk. "You're nothing like the stories. The Zathari are supposed to be, well, terrifying. But you're just a guy trying to survive like the rest of us." Zerk's chest tightened. He had never considered himself just a guy. He was a commander, a leader. He was the strength of his people, the embodiment of their power. He wasn't supposed to be relatable. He wasn't supposed to need anyone. But in that moment, the harsh reality of the situation settled over him. He wasn't invincible. He wasn't some god of war. He was just a soldier, a broken soldier, struggling to survive. "I'm nothing like you," Zerk growled softly, though there was no real venom in his words. "I am Zathari. We do not rely on others." Ethan's face softened as if he understood something that Zerk didn't. "Yeah, I get that, but sometimes you can't do everything on your own." "I know that better than most." The silence that followed felt heavy, but Zerk didn't know how to respond. He couldn't argue the truth of Ethan's words. There had been moments when Zerk had been forced to rely on the skills of others, his crew, his warriors, his armor. But even then, he had never considered them help. They had simply done their duty. Now the reality was different. He wasn't relying on the strength of his people. He was relying on this human, this strange creature whose kind had always been beneath him in his mind. Ethan had saved him, twice, and Zerk didn't know how to feel about that. The night grew darker and the temperature of the planet dropped sharply. The wind howled across the barren landscape, sending waves of dust into the air. Ethan started a fire and the warmth of it felt comforting. It was strange, Zerk thought, how a human could create warmth in such a cold place. He had never thought of humans as capable of surviving on planets like this. They were fragile, soft, and easily broken in his mind. But Ethan proved that wrong over and over again. As they sat around the fire, the flames crackling and lighting up their faces, Zerk couldn't help but notice the ease with which Ethan carried himself. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation. He was completely unbothered by the deadly environment. Zerk could see the strength in Ethan, not in physical size, but in his calm, his determination, his refusal to give up. After a few moments, Ethan spoke again, this time his voice quieter, almost reflective. "You ever wonder why people like us end up on these kinds of missions?" Zerk tilted his head slightly. "What do you mean?" Ethan leaned back, staring up at the stars. "I mean, why do we do this? Why do we risk our lives on planets like this, where we don't know if we're going to make it out alive? We're just soldiers, after all. We're trained to follow orders, to fight, to win. But every time it feels like we're fighting something bigger than ourselves." Zerk watched Ethan for a moment, taking in his words. It was true. The human's life had been spent in wars, in missions that could end in death at any moment. Zerk knew that feeling all too well. He had fought in battles that spanned galaxies, confronted enemies who would stop at nothing to annihilate his people. And yet, he had never questioned why he did it. It had been his duty. It had been his purpose. But here now, stranded on this godforsaken planet, Zerk began to wonder if there was more to it. More to life than duty, than battle. "Maybe we're just trying to make a difference," Ethan said, his voice steady, yet tinged with something deeper. "Maybe that's why we fight." Zerk was silent for a long time. He hadn't thought about that. He had never considered the larger picture. He had always fought because that's what was expected of him, because that's what his people did. But was there more to it? Was there a reason to fight beyond survival and conquest? Zerk looked up at the stars, just as Ethan had, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The universe was so vast, so full of endless possibilities. Could there be more to life than what he had always believed? Could there be a purpose beyond the war and the endless cycle of violence? Ethan shifted beside him, pulling his jacket tighter against the cold. "You know, back on Earth, people talk a lot about the meaning of life, what we're here for, but I think it's simpler than that. We do what we can to survive, to help others, to make the world around us a little better, even if it's just one person at a time." Zerk's gaze flickered over to Ethan. The human was looking at him again, his eyes searching, almost as if waiting for a response. Zerk didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure he understood fully. But in that moment, as the fire flickered and crackled between them, Zerk realized something. He had never thought of helping others, never thought of making the world around him better. He had only ever thought about conquest. But Ethan, this human, was different. Maybe there was something more to this strange bond they were forming, something that neither of them understood yet. But Zerk could feel it, the change, the shift in his thinking. It was subtle but undeniable. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was starting to believe in something else. The days had blurred together as Zerk and Ethan moved deeper into the wilderness of Vera 7. The harsh environment of the planet was relentless, endless sandstorms, jagged mountains that seemed to pierce the sky, and creatures that roamed the landscape like shadows of death. Each day felt like a test of endurance, but somehow they had managed to survive. Zerk, despite his initial resistance, was slowly learning to rely on Ethan. The human had proven his worth in ways Zerk hadn't imagined possible. Where Zerk's strength had once been his only asset, Ethan's calmness in the face of danger, his resourcefulness, and his ability to stay focused under pressure had shown Zerk the true meaning of survival. The Zathari commander was learning that it wasn't enough to be strong. Sometimes it took something more, something that went beyond mere physical power. They had set up camp in a small cave, sheltered from the worst of the storms. The night was cold, and the wind howled outside, but inside the cave there was warmth from the small fire Ethan had started. The flames flickered in the darkness, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Zerk sat across from Ethan, his damaged armor now fully repaired, but still feeling strange to wear. It was a part of him, but it no longer felt as it once did. He had been forced to rely on Ethan, a human, to fix it, and in doing so, he had unknowingly allowed the human into his life in a way he couldn't quite explain. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, breaking the silence, "about what you said the other day, about not needing anyone." Zerk raised an eyebrow. "What of it?" Ethan's voice was steady, but there was something in the way he spoke that made Zerk listen more closely. "You said you don't rely on anyone, that the Zathari don't need help, but that's not really true, is it? You've needed me more than once. You needed my help to fix your armor to stay alive." Zerk's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. He couldn't deny the truth in Ethan's words, but to admit it aloud, to say that he had relied on a human. That was something Zerk was not yet ready to do. He had been raised to be independent, to be strong, to be invincible. Admitting weakness, even the smallest hint of it, was a betrayal to everything he had ever known. "I do not need help," Zerk said finally, his voice a little rougher than he intended. "I am Zathari, I am a warrior, I do not rely on others." Ethan's eyes softened. "You're still a warrior, but everyone needs help sometimes, Zerk, even you. You can't do everything on your own." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Zerk's mind raced. Ethan was right, of course. He had needed help, but admitting it was a struggle. There was something about needing another person, especially a human, that felt wrong to Zerk. It felt like a betrayal of everything he had ever stood for. "I don't understand you," Zerk muttered, his eyes fixed on the fire. "You humans are so different. You've always been weak, soft. How is it that you can survive in a place like this? How do you keep going?" Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "I think you're wrong about humans, Zerk. We're not weak, we're just different. We've got to be tougher in ways that aren't always obvious. It's not about being the strongest. It's about having the will to keep going, no matter what." Zerk remained silent. He wanted to argue, to tell Ethan that his kind were the true survivors, the true warriors. But deep down, he knew Ethan was right. There was something about the human spirit, his determination, that made him stronger than Zerk had ever given credit for. As the night wore on, Zerk lay down on the cold stone floor of the cave, staring up at the ceiling. He couldn't sleep. His mind kept returning to the same thought. Ethan had saved him. Again and again, the human had come to his aid, not out of obligation, but out of some strange form of compassion. Zerk had never known that kind of kindness, that willingness to risk everything for another being. He didn't understand it. How could a human, so fragile compared to him, risk his life without hesitation? How could someone who had no reason to care about him, a creature from a distant world, offer his help so freely? And yet Ethan had. It was a truth Zerk couldn't ignore. In the moments when his strength failed him, it was Ethan who had kept him alive. It was Ethan who had held his hand, metaphorically, and guided him through the storm. As the days passed, Zerk grew more accustomed to the strange feeling that lingered in his chest whenever he looked at Ethan. It was not a feeling of pity, as he had first expected. It was something else, something that made him uncomfortable, but also warm. The human's presence was a strange comfort in this hostile environment. Zerk had never imagined that he could find solace in the company of someone like Ethan. They traveled together through the endless desert, crossing vast plains that seemed to stretch on forever. The landscape was unrelenting, with no signs of civilization, no hope of rescue. The wind swept through the air, carrying with it the dust of a planet that had known only desolation for centuries. But through it all, Zerk and Ethan kept moving forward. There were times when the silence between them felt heavy, as if both of them were thinking about things they didn't know how to say. But there were also moments when the quiet wasn't uncomfortable. When they shared a look or a small, unexpected laugh, it felt natural. It felt like something more than just two beings trying to survive. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Ethan spoke up again, his voice quieter this time. "You ever wonder what's out there? Beyond this planet, I mean?" Zerk glanced at him. "What do you mean?" Ethan shrugged. "I don't know, I mean this place is all we've seen for days, but there's a whole universe out there, a whole galaxy. I've seen a lot of it, but there's still so much I don't understand. I guess after everything we've been through, I can't help but think maybe there's something more to it all, something bigger than just surviving." Zerk thought about this for a long moment. He had spent his entire life fighting, conquering, surviving. But he had never thought about the bigger picture. He had never considered what lay beyond his immediate world, beyond the battles and wars that had defined his existence. Ethan's words struck a chord within him, though. For the first time, Zerk wondered if there was more to life than just survival. "I don't know," Zerk said finally. "Maybe there is, but I've never had the luxury of thinking about it. My life has always been about the next fight, the next victory. I've never had the time to think about what comes after." Ethan nodded slowly. "I get that, but maybe, just maybe, the point isn't to fight all the time. Maybe it's about finding something worth fighting for, something bigger than yourself." Zerk was silent. His thoughts were a whirlpool of confusion and realization. Could it be possible that there was more to life than the constant battles? Could it be possible that he, a warrior, could find something to fight for beyond the destruction of his enemies? For the first time in his life, Zerk wasn't sure, but he didn't mind the uncertainty. Maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward understanding something bigger. Something worth fighting for. The wind howled across the barren landscape of Vera 7, carrying with it the promise of another sandstorm. The air felt thick with the weight of the planet's unforgiving nature. Zerk's gaze fixed on the horizon, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of red and orange. It had been days since they had last encountered any form of hostile life, but Zerk knew better than to let his guard down. The planet was dangerous, always watching, always waiting. Ethan was busy preparing their camp, setting up a crude shelter to protect them from the storm. Zerk watched him for a moment, noting the ease with which the human moved. He had never thought much about humans before this journey, had never cared to. But now, as he observed Ethan, he began to see something different. The human wasn't just a soldier. He was resourceful, thoughtful, and determined. He had adapted to the harsh environment of this planet far quicker than Zerk had expected. As the wind picked up, the first grains of sand began to whip through the air. The storm was coming. "You should take cover," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the wind as he turned toward Zerk. "It's going to get worse." Zerk nodded, not needing to be told twice. He had lived through countless storms in his life, but there was something about this one, something that felt different. The planet seemed alive in a way that unsettled him. The sandstorm wasn't just a natural occurrence. It felt like it was intentionally moving toward them, as if it had a purpose. Without another word, Zerk moved toward the shelter Ethan had built, ducking inside just as the wind picked up in strength. The howling noise outside grew louder, drowning out everything else. The shelter was small, only big enough for the two of them to huddle together for protection. As the storm raged outside, Zerk couldn't help but notice the warmth of the fire flickering in the center of the shelter, the light casting dancing shadows on the walls. It wasn't much, but it was enough to stave off the cold. Ethan sat down across from Zerk, his face illuminated by the firelight. "You know," he said, breaking the silence again, "I've been thinking, you said before that you don't need anyone, but I think you're wrong." Zerk's gaze flickered toward him, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" Ethan leaned forward slightly, his eyes steady. "I think you do need someone. You need someone who's got your back, someone who's there when you're down, when you can't do it on your own. Even the strongest warriors need help sometimes." Zerk stiffened at the words. He hated the idea. He hated the thought that he needed anyone, let alone a human, to survive. But as the moments passed, he couldn't help but recall all the times Ethan had stepped in, all the moments when the human had given him strength when he had none. The repairs to his armor, the fire they shared, the way Ethan had kept him moving forward through each grueling day. "I do not need help," Zerk growled, though there was less force in his voice than before. "I am not weak." Ethan didn't flinch. "I never said you were weak, but we're not invincible, Zerk. No one is. You can be as strong as you want, but there are things in this world that will bring you to your knees, and that's when you need someone who can help you get back up." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Zerk didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared into the fire, his mind racing. He had always been strong, always been the one others relied on. It was hard to accept the idea of being vulnerable. The thought of needing help was a crack in his armor, a chink in his pride that he didn't know how to repair. As the storm raged outside, the temperature inside the shelter dropped. Zerk pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling settling in his chest. It wasn't just the cold. It was the realization that Ethan had become an important part of his survival, that, for the first time, Zerk wasn't alone. "We'll be okay," Ethan said quietly, almost as if he could sense Zerk's unease. We just have to stick together. Zerk didn't answer. He couldn't. His thoughts were too tangled. He had never been someone to rely on others. He had been raised to be self-sufficient, to lead his people to victory without the help of anyone else. But in the face of this storm, in the silence that filled the shelter, Zerk began to understand something. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe he had been wrong all along. The storm outside began to intensify, the wind roaring like a wild animal. The shelter shook as the force of the wind pressed against it. Zerk could feel the power of the planet, how it was trying to crush them, how it wanted to break them down. And yet they were here, alive, because of the strength they had found in each other. Hours passed in silence, the storm showing no signs of relenting. Zerk lay on the ground, his eyes fixed on the ceiling of the shelter. Ethan had fallen asleep, curled up in the corner, his breathing slow and steady. Zerk's mind wouldn't let him sleep. He kept thinking about the words Ethan had said earlier, about needing someone, about being part of something bigger than just his own strength. Suddenly, a loud crash broke through the noise of the storm, followed by a low growl. Zerk's eyes snapped open and his senses immediately went on high alert. The wind outside howled even louder now, but this sound was different. It wasn't just the storm. It was something else, something alive. Ethan shot up at the noise, instantly awake and alert. "What was that?" he whispered urgently. Zerk didn't answer. His body was already moving, his instincts taking over. He stood up, grabbing his weapon and checking the readouts on his armor. The sensors weren't picking up anything, but that didn't mean the threat wasn't there. He motioned for Ethan to stay close, his voice low but urgent. "We need to be quiet. Whatever that was, it's out there." They moved cautiously toward the shelter's entrance, peeking out into the storm. The winds were so strong now that it was nearly impossible to see anything beyond a few feet. Zerk's enhanced vision scanned the area, but the storm made it difficult to pick up any movement. Then, a shadow passed by them, darting through the sand like a blur. Zerk's heart raced as his instincts told him that whatever it was fast and deadly. "I'll check it out," Zerk said to Ethan, but before he could move, Ethan grabbed his arm, his grip firm but calm. "Let me go first," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I've got experience with things like this." Zerk hesitated. The human wanted to go out into the storm to face whatever creature was out there. But then again, Ethan had survived this far. He had survived because of his quick thinking and his ability to adapt. For the first time since they'd met, Zerk nodded, stepping back to let Ethan lead the way. Ethan crouched low and moved forward, his eyes scanning the environment carefully. Zerk followed behind, keeping close. The wind howled, but the sound of it was soon drowned out by the growl of something large. The creature, whatever it was nearby. Zerk tensed, his hand gripping his weapon tightly. This was it. This was the test. Was Ethan truly capable of surviving in this dangerous world? Was he capable of leading the way when Zerk could not? The wind screamed around them, rattling the shelter, as the creature outside snarled in the storm. The howls of the wind mingled with the deep growls of whatever was lurking just beyond their shelter, its presence a tangible threat. Zerk's hand instinctively gripped the hilt of his weapon, ready for whatever was to come. He could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins, his heightened senses fully alert. Ethan, however, seemed unfazed. He moved with the confidence of someone who had dealt with danger before. Zerk had never seen a human react like this. Most of them would have panicked or at least shown some sign of fear. But Ethan just crouched low, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the storm-swept desert around them. His breathing was steady, controlled. Zerk took a step forward, but Ethan held up a hand, signaling him to stop. The human's eyes locked with his, a silent message passing between them. Zerk could see that Ethan was thinking, strategizing. For all his strength, Zerk knew that Ethan's survival wasn't just about being tough. It was about being smart, being aware. That's what made him a valuable ally in ways Zerk hadn't fully understood until now. "Stay close," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible over the howl of the storm. "Whatever this is, it won't be easy." Zerk nodded, silently acknowledging Ethan's leadership. There was a time when he would have scoffed at the idea of a human taking charge, but now he was starting to see Ethan's value. The human was more than just a survivor. He was someone who knew how to think through the chaos, to make decisions under pressure. Ethan moved first, cautiously stepping outside the shelter, his eyes scanning the darkness. Zerk followed closely behind, keeping low, staying in the shadows as much as possible. The storm whipped around them, sand stinging their faces, but Zerk's enhanced vision cut through the blinding dust, locking onto the creature's shadow moving erratically in the distance. It was large, much larger than any animal Zerk had ever seen. Its form was hulking, its limbs long and powerful. From what he could see, it appeared to be a predator, perhaps something that had adapted to the harsh conditions of Vera 7. It moved fast, its body cutting through the storm like a ghost, its low growls echoing across the plain. Ethan slowed his pace, crouching down beside a large rock. Zerk followed his lead, instinctively lowering his body, becoming as still as the night around them. For a moment there was nothing but the howling wind and the distant sound of the creature's growls. It was as if the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting. Ethan's hand moved subtly, signaling for Zerk to stay put. Zerk's mind raced, his instincts screaming for him to act, but he held back. He had learned by now that rushing in blindly wasn't always the best option. He had seen Ethan's cool-headedness in action, and it was clear that the human was trying to understand the creature's behavior, trying to figure out how best to approach the situation. The creature was still out there, its form visible now and then through the dust, moving closer to their position. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, a piercing yellow that seemed to cut through the storm. Zerk could feel the tension building in his chest. It was only a matter of time before the creature found them, and when it did, they would need to be ready. "We'll flank it," Ethan whispered, his voice calm and steady. "We have the advantage of the storm. It won't be able to track us well in this." Zerk nodded, his muscles coiling in preparation. For the first time, he was following Ethan's lead without question. It felt strange, but not in a bad way. He had learned to trust this human to follow his lead in the face of danger. Ethan had proven himself time and time again to be more than just a soldier. He was a survivor, a strategist. The two of them moved as one, silent and swift. They circled around the creature, staying low, staying hidden in the shadows. Zerk felt the weight of the situation pressing on him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something deeper, something that neither he nor Ethan had ever said aloud, but that they both felt. They had come to rely on each other. They had come to trust each other in ways neither of them had expected. The creature stopped moving for a moment, its massive body standing still against the storm. It sniffed the air, its head tilting slightly, as if sensing something was wrong. Zerk's heart skipped a beat. It was almost as if it knew they were nearby. Ethan motioned for Zerk to hold steady. His plan was clear now. They would strike together, a coordinated attack. Zerk could feel the tension in the air, the weight of their plan hanging over them. He was a warrior. He was a hunter. But for the first time, he realized that his strength alone wasn't enough. He needed Ethan's mind. He needed Ethan's presence. The creature moved again, this time closer to them. It was almost within striking distance. Zerk's muscles tensed, ready to spring into action. But Ethan was faster. He darted forward, his movements swift and calculated, drawing the creature's attention. Zerk followed close behind, rushing in to flank the creature. They moved as one, Ethan drawing the creature's focus, Zerk striking from the side. The creature turned in an instant, its massive claws slashing through the air, narrowly missing Ethan. But it was too late. Zerk lunged, his weapon slicing through the air, connecting with the creature's side. The creature let out a roar of pain, but it didn't back down. It swung its massive tail, knocking Zerk off balance. The Zathari warrior grunted as he hit the ground, the wind knocked out of him. The creature advanced, its sharp claws raised, but before it could strike, Ethan was there, moving with quick precision. He fired a shot from his weapon, hitting the creature squarely in the side. It howled in pain, but it wasn't enough to stop it. Zerk regained his footing, charging at the creature with all his strength. This time, there was no hesitation. He moved like a predator, his every instinct firing at once. With a final, powerful strike, he drove his weapon deep into the creature's side, puncturing its heart. The creature let out one final, desperate cry before collapsing in the sand, its massive body falling limp. Zerk stood over it, panting, his chest heaving with the effort. The adrenaline was still rushing through his veins, but the danger had passed. For now, Ethan walked up beside him, his face unreadable, but there was a glimmer of something in his eyes. Satisfaction. Relief. Gratitude. "That was close," Ethan said quietly, his voice tinged with a small smile. "But we made it." Zerk nodded, his gaze still on the fallen creature. "You were right, we do need each other." Ethan didn't say anything at first. He simply clapped Zerk on the shoulder, a gesture that spoke volumes more than any words could. In that moment, Zerk understood something he had never considered before. Strength wasn't just about power or force. It was about knowing when to fight, when to rely on others, and when to trust. "We're a team," Ethan said simply, his voice calm and sure. "We make it out of this together." Zerk didn't respond at first. Instead, he looked out across the desert, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Maybe Ethan had been right all along. Maybe it wasn't about being the strongest or the toughest. Maybe it was about something more, something he had never understood until now. Together, they had survived the storm, and together they would face whatever came next.